Today I'm going to be sharing with you how I decide when to use wet on wet versus wet on dry in my watercolor paintings. We're going to start these violets with a wet on wet approach, but with this one I'm going to do a little more layering, and this one I'm going to be creating a little more mingled color. Then I'll share a couple different techniques for adding your wet on dry details so that you can leave your edges crisp or you can soften them. I'll include a link to the video where I teach you how to draw these, as well as a link to my Etsy shop if you would like to trace these flowers instead. My name is Jessica and I'm so glad to have you here. Let's go ahead and get started. Now for my colors today, I have a few varieties of purple. I made all these purples using quinacridone magenta and phthalo blue. So I've got one here that's a little bit more on the quinacridone magenta side. So it's a little more pinky. And I'll just add some water so you can see how it looks watered down. Then I've got a purple, which you can see is, whoops, it's bleeding now. It's a little bit of a balance between the magenta and the phthalo blue. And then finally, this one has more phthalo blue, less magenta. So it's a little bit more of a bluish purple. Now, over here, I've just got the same mixtures. Pretty much just took this and added a little water to it so that if we want a little bit more of a watered down mixture that's a little less concentrated, it's already ready. Sometimes it can be nice to have a more diluted version of each color, but you can absolutely dilute your paint as well by just dipping a little bit more water on your brush as you're painting or working more wet on wet. So I don't usually do this, but I happen to have diluted mixtures on my palette today. The first technique I always start with is wet on wet. So I'm going to go ahead and fill in some of these shapes just with some water, and I'm going to come in and do maybe these 4 shapes here. Then I'm going to leave a little bit of a dry gap between these two because I can see in the reference photo that there's actually a little bit of a change or enough of a change between this and this petal that I don't want them to bleed together. So I'm going to go ahead, just wet that quick, and then I'm going to come in, and I do like to start generally with my warmer colors or the colors that are less blue first. And I'm just dropping that kind of pinky color in and letting it just kind of bleed around. And I'm paying attention to where I see more of the pinky color in my reference photo so I can just get the pinky color where I want more of it. Okay, this is starting to dry a little bit and it's not bleeding around as much. So I like having a second brush to kind of guide that around a little bit. So I'll do that. And then I'll come down into this one, bring it down. And you can guide this if you don't like the way that wet on wet flow is happening. You can definitely use another brush, just a little bit of a damp brush, and just kind of blend it around, guide it to the direction or the movement that you want to have in your flower petal. So I'm going to come down here now and put a little bit more of the pinky color. I can clearly see it. And I want to come up to the edge of here, but not cross over. So you can see here where I've got that dry section and it's not bleeding between the petals. So that's what I'm hoping for, and hopefully I'll manage to maintain that. It's not the end of the world if it doesn't, but I would prefer if I could maintain it. So just picking up a little bit more of the pink here, but just a little bit more of it in here. I'm calling it pink. We're gonna call this one more pink because it's the closest to pink, and this one purple, and then I'll call this one blue, even though yeah, they're all purples, different shades of purple. Okay, now I'm gonna come in here, and because there's been a few seconds of time passing, I'm just gonna make sure this is indeed still wet. Sometimes when you leave something for a little bit, it does dry and then it doesn't behave like wet on wet anymore. So I don't really need too much pink in this one. I'm just gonna drop a little bit here, and I can definitely see this color down here, so I'm gonna drop more of it. And as I said, if you don't like the way things are moving around there, you can always adjust that. I kind of like that look, so I'm going to leave it be. And so that's going to be my first layer. I could drop more color in. And you know what? Maybe we'll do that on this one so you can see a little bit of that happening, how I could add more than one color. But this time I'm going to only paint these 3 with water first, because if you look at the reference photo here, you see this white section here, and I don't want to get it too filled in with color. If I paint all 5 petals, unless I leave a little gap of dryness right here, the color in these petals will bleed into here. And so to avoid that, I'm just going to come in and just go ahead and paint these 2 top ones. I'm fine with them bleeding together. And then down here. And whoops, I kind of went out of the line a little bit. And hopefully it won't matter. Just put some water in here. And then I'm going to go ahead and drop the purpley pink color in here. Let's go ahead, put a little, I see more of that color at the top. So I'll just drop it at the top. And then let's just go directly into the purple. And you'll notice if I don't want as much color, I'll come into this more watered down mixture. It's just slightly more watered down, but it's going to keep me from getting too dark too fast. There's no reason you couldn't just add a little water to your brush as well to make your paint more diluted. Just drop that color in here. And I'm moving, as you can see, in the direction of the creases or folds in the flower, but I'm not being super strict with it. Now I can see things are bleeding down. I wish I would have left a little bit of white space. Here you can see a bit of a bleed, so a little too wet on wet. I'll have to control that. I'll show you in a minute how I do that. Just move this upwards a little bit. Just guide it around. Don't need to be too fancy about it, but I am going to take a clean, thirsty brush and just lift a bit of that color out. I don't want too much of that in there. I want this mainly white, as I mentioned. And yes, that's bleeding down here. I can just guide it around a little bit just so that I don't get a goofy line if it's doing anything I don't want. But otherwise, I think it's okay. I don't mind having that tiny bit there. It would have been good if I left a little bit of dryness just between there. But I'm going to come in now and I'll use the purpley color. I'm not seeing too much pink. I might drop a little after, but let's just get the purple on here first. Let it bleed around. Let's tap a little bit of this pinky color, just a bit. The area, if you want to say there's any pink in this one, it would be kind of right along here. You can almost see it underneath those dark lines, right? And then finally, coming in with my more bluish color, and I'm just going to tap that color on along the bottom because I do see more of that in the reference photo. So you can see there's a couple different approaches I just took for wet on wet, but both cases I applied my water, dropped my paint in, and I'm getting this really soft diffused color in my flower. I really like that effect in my initial layers, and that's why I like starting with wet on wet. If I feel like the paint moves around too much because there's a lot of water and some pigments just move more, I can just, again, take my brush and make the brush clean and a little bit thirsty by tapping it on my paper towel and then lifting that out. Here, let me just bring my paper towel in a little bit so you can see. So just kind of tap like that, wash, dry my brush, and then I can lift more if I want, but I think I'm okay with how that's looking. Now, because this petal is damp or wet, I want to dry everything before I come back and do these petals. And I'm also going to add another layer to this one. And this time you'll see how I build this one up a little bit with some more color. This one, as you can see, I got all those colors on in one shot. So you're going to be able to see how you can also change how much color you want to drop into your initial layers. And one factor you might want to consider if you're deciding whether to do, say, in layers where you do all of your pinks, then all of your purples, and all of your blues, versus what I've done over here and dropped them all in at once, would be how many petals you're working on at a time, or how large the area is. Because I worked on all 5 of these, this one would have been drying probably at a funny stage by the time I got the pink on all the other petals. So to come back and start dropping the purple colors could have ended up with some different blooms and things happening that I didn't like. Whereas with this one, I did these 2 as one shape, and that wasn't too large a shape. And then I came down here and did this one. So generally, if you've got larger areas or multiple shapes you're doing at once, that might be a time you consider just using one color, drying it and coming on with another color, just because of the time frame. If things are starting to dry already, you don't want to come drop more paint in when it's at that kind of in-between stage. Whereas with this, I had the time to do that. So I'll go ahead and dry this and then I'll be right back. All right, so now that I've dried this, I'm going to come in and add my purples. And once again, I'm going to do it wet on wet because I'm still in the early stages of the painting. So I'll put water everywhere. And you know what, with this one, I think I probably can get away with joining these shapes with the purples. And then I might even try, if I'm wet enough, dropping in some of my darker colors. We'll see. So I'm just going to go over everything with water, get things nice and wet, and then I'm going to come in with my purple. I'm actually thinking I'll probably use more of the concentrated color. I feel like the lighter one, once it dried, it's almost a little bit too light. So I'm just going to come in here and drop the purple in. That's actually quite dark. Let's water that down a little bit. Let's actually use a separate brush. This is just a brush with water on it, and I'm going to guide that around And I'm going to kind of diffuse that a bit. I probably could get away with maybe a little bit less purple because I still want to get some of that blue color on later. So I'm just going to come over here, just make sure, yeah, I can see these are still wet. Okay, let's go ahead and drop some of the purple over here. Again, I'm kind of, you'll see, I'm moving my brush in the direction of the creases and folds, even though I'm not defining anything yet. I just tend to like painting that way. That's my personal preference because it can sometimes, as you see, have a little bit of texture starting to show up even before you're actually intentionally applying a lot of texture. So I'm gonna come in here, and yes, it's fine if they bleed together this time. Just want to get a nice kind of coat of that purple color, and I'm looking at my reference photo to see where either there needs to be more blue or areas that are lighter so I don't overdo. So for instance, I'm kind of looking at it and going, you know what? I see a little bit of lightness here. So I'm going to just lift a little bit with my brush so I don't go too purple too soon. And then I'll come back down here and keep working. I see a little bit more of the purpley color right along here. So drop a bit more of it and then less as I come here because I see more of the blue color. So I'll just fill that in. And then finally, this one is quite purple, so let's just fill it in. It will have more blue later, but we'll fill this in. I'm getting pretty heavy. Just wash my brush off a bit. I don't want to go too dark too soon. It's better to do it in multiple layers if you need to than to go too overboard. But as you can see, I could have probably gone a little darker right there. Now I'm just using my clean, thirsty brush again. Just lift a little bit where I see the lights on this one. This is actually a situation, I could have separated these by doing them in different layers so that I didn't have it bleed together right here, but it's okay. As long as I go a little lighter, better to be on the light side. I can come back in later and drop the darks and define that better. So if in doubt, stay light if you're having anything happen like this, because you can darken it in a second layer or third layer or whatever layer you need to. So we're gonna come over here, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna once again with this flower do all three colors in these petals, and I'm gonna aim for something a little darker so that I have hopefully achieved a dark enough value, and then I can come a little darker with these as like a second layer, just because I feel like I could probably darken things just a touch. So I'm gonna come a little darker. First water, and I probably will use, I don't know if I need to go darker with the pinky colors. I could use some more watery. Let's try the darker one, a little bit of it, just on the tip of my brush. And I'm still going to apply my brush strokes with that kind of directional stroke that matches the creases and the folds, even though, like I say, I'm coming back with more detail after. Now I'm going to come in and drop the purples in while everything's still wet. You can see I'm still kind of working a bit lighter. I'll drop some darks in though, just so that I minimize how many layers I have to add to this one. That's the main reason you want to maybe go darker. There's nothing wrong with adding multiple layers. Some artists do prefer working that way. For the sake of time, I'm trying to minimize how often I have to add another layer. But you can see I went over the line. That's okay. I'll just see if I can clean that up. Sometimes it's better to deal with it later. Yeah, worked okay with my thirsty brush, but there's times it can bleed around worse and you might need to just leave it. But I'm going to come in now with a little bit of the darker purple because I was kind of lighter, and I'm going to just put a little bit of that darker purple right in here and let it kind of bleed outwards. So you can kind of see that going like so. And this one, a little bit risky because of where I went outside the line. Let's just see if it will work. It's kind of not working because it's a little damp there. It's okay. I'll try and clean that up after. I'll just get this on since I've got it on my brush. And I just wash and dry my brush, although a second brush is fine. I'm going to drop a little bit more of the pinky color and see if I can get a little more texture here while it's still wet. Get more of that pinky look. Let's go ahead and use the second brush and soften things rather than continuing to wash my other brush. Save on paint a little bit. So I'm just softening things with that wet or damp brush. I'm honestly not sure what's happening if I've got a little bit of dust in here. So what I'm going to do, this is a totally unplanned thing, but because I'm seeing that dusty look, I'm adding more water and I'm going to kind of lift a little bit and drop more color in and just see if I can figure out why things are looking a little bit fuzzy or dusty, because I'm not exactly sure what's up with that. Just lift, so wash and dry my brush, lift, and then I'll drop more color in and just see if it behaves any different. There might have been a bit of fuzz on my brush or my paper, I'm not sure. It just felt like something was kind of weird there. So you're seeing an extra step than what you would usually need to do here. So I'm just going to drop a little bit more of the pinky color first, and again, same direction, trying to achieve some of the creases and folds. Not necessary in this layer, but I'm just still thinking about that as I drop it in. And then I'll come in with, once again, doing the exact same thing with this purple color, putting a little more of it where it's darker. And then finally, I'm going to use a little bit of this blue here. So we get a little bit of all three colors happening at once. Just going to come a little further down with it. I'm happier with the fact I got the color a bit deeper. I might lift just a little bit, kind of at the outside edges, because again, I'm looking at the reference photo, seeing a little bit of light there. So I'm just going to use the same technique I showed you earlier for lifting, where I wash and dry my brush and then just gently lift a little bit out. And I'm doing it again, same direction as the creases and folds. Now I'm going to go ahead and dry everything so that I can add the layer with the purple blue. All right, so now with this layer, I want to start separating things out a little bit. So I'm going to do every second petal just so I can start to create a little bit of depth between the shapes. So I'm going to come in now, and I'm using actually the darkest of these dark blues, and I'm going to push the shadows a little darker here. Actually, I can put a little more purple with this too. And I'm going to come in here. I'm looking at my reference photo, trying to see if I can achieve some of the look that I see down here. And I can see a nice line. I'm going to start creating a little bit of detail just by the fact that I'm a little bit drier right now than I was in some of those first layers. I'm just going to use my damp brush and guide things around. Kind of like that, and put a little bit more of that blue. Just looking at the reference photo to try and figure out how much blue. And yes, definitely trying to achieve a little bit more of the detail. You don't have to do this in this layer because we will be getting some wet on dry later, and I'll explain that. But if you want, this is an okay time to create a little bit of detail where we're starting to almost go a little bit into what I call wet on damp. And I would choose to go wet on damp anytime I'm wanting to be able to achieve a little bit more detail without being dry. So that's kind of where we're getting a little bit more on the damp side. The more it dries, the more crisp your details will be. And so that's kind of how you're going to make that decision. Depends how crisp you want your details at any given time in the painting. Okay, I'm going to do this one next because it's kind of on its lonesome, and this is going to help separate things, right? We had a mess going here because I probably could have separated them even in another layer, but we're going to start separating them now so that we can achieve the depth that we want between these different petals. So just dropping that dark color, and then I'm going to come down here with just a bit more. I keep looking at the photo and kind of going back and forth between my water brush and my paintbrush to decide how much of this blue I want and how I want it to kind of blend down here. I do kind of want a little bit of that pinky purple look down here, right? You can see that in the photos. So I'm gonna go a little bit more blue up here. Oof, that's too much, and that's okay. So I just use this brush and just kind of guide that around so it's not quite as strong. We want the strongest color over here. And yeah, I'm getting a little bit sloppy right there. That's okay, because we're gonna be dark on that petal after. Actually, because these two petals aren't touching, I think I probably can get away with doing this one right now. So just drop more color down here and let it bleed upwards. And it's fine if these two kind of mush together a little bit. That's okay with me. And then I will come in, I can always define them a little more after if I want to, but I managed to kind of paint them almost joined, and they look very dark, both of them at the base. So just drag this color around. I will be getting more detail in another layer, so I'm not worried about being perfect here. I'm gonna drop a little more dark so that both of them are quite dark right there. Just pull this with my brush. Okay, so these two, I kind of feel like I want them to dry before I come in here with detail, just because we don't want them bleeding up into here. So I could come and do this flower next, but to keep things simple, let's get this one done and then we'll come back over here. So I will dry it and finish this one, and then we'll move back over here and get kind of both the flowers at the same stage before we move into the details. Okay, so I'm going to repeat the steps on these two petals, and I might even have to dry again between them because we will have things kind of wanting to mush together. So I'm just going to come in here with my darkest color. Actually, let's go a little more purpley this time, just a bit down here, because I feel like there's more purple than there is blue. So I'm just going to drop a little bit of that in. You can see I'm fairly wet, and that's why it's kind of going a little bit more blurry looking. Drop a little bit of darkness here, and then I'm going to use my Clean Thirsty brush and just kind of blend things ever so slightly, and then drop a little bit of the lighter blue up here using my brush that I was using just for water, but I'm just dropping a little bit of that bluey color into this section because I see the blue color. And you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and wash my paintbrush, and might even use a little bit of darker blue right in the darkest spots again where I'm seeing it's dark. This one is more of a purple color. In here it's a purpley blue in my mind. Okay, tap my brush off and just put a little bit more of that bluey color. Again, just looking at the reference photo to figure this out. Maybe a little more in here. I think I'm almost happy with this. And then this one, I will want to come on here after, just so that I can maintain the difference between these two petals. So again, I could come over here, work on this flower, but for the sake of simplicity, I'll just go ahead and dry it one more time so that you can see this flower come together. If you're enjoying today's video, I would love to invite you to join my free newsletter. In it, you'll find creative inspiration and be the first to know about new tutorials, classes, and workshops. If that sounds like something you'd enjoy, you can find a link in the description below. Now let's get back to painting. So now that this petal is dry, I can come in and do this final petal. Once again, painting wet on wet. And this time I think I might come in with my lighter, slightly lighter blue to start with, just because this one does feel like it's kind of got this lighter blue translucency. A little bit more. Then I'll probably drop a little bit of the other colors in just for a little bit of texture, probably a little bit of the purple, a little bit more of this bluey color. I actually did not wet this section here. I'm coming up to it with my paint, but I'm not going to worry. I'm going to get more detail there later. It's kind of a little bit of a funny hard edge. I don't know if you can see that in the camera. It looks a little wonky where the white and the dark are meeting, but that's okay because I'm going to come in and get some really dark details. You're not going to be able to see those as well. Let's just do a tiny bit of purple. I'm not sure which one is going to be the best here. Don't want to go too dark, but I do see a bit of a purple detail here. So I'll just tap my brush off and see how this works. I'm hoping I'm a little on the damp side. Yeah, sort of maintaining some detail. Let's tap my brush off a bit more. Again, this isn't our detail layer, but I do want to get just a little bit of the purple in here, and I kind of feel like those details could have just a touch of purple to them. Maybe a little bit more blue. Again, we want it to harmonize with the rest of the flower, but this particular petal does feel a little bit lighter, a little more translucent, especially on this side. So I'm going to use a little bit of water now and just, actually let's use this brush. So make it clean and make it a little bit more thirsty, and just lift a bit of the color out of this side, just a little bit, so that it's a little bit lighter. Okay. Maybe I'll just tap the smallest amount of purple into this area. Not too much, because like I say, details are coming. And I am working more like a wet on damp, just so I maintain a little bit of those details. Let's go over here and just push everything because as you can see, when I did my first wet on wet wash here, it kind of dried a bit lighter than I would have liked. And what I really want to push is those more bluey colors. I'm really not minding the amount of pink I have here, but definitely I feel like it needs a little bit more of the blue and the purple. So I'll just do these two petals. Again, I'm doing them together. I will separate them out eventually. So I'm going to come in here, probably go back and forth between the blue and the purple. I'm going to just come in a little bit closer, fill in some of the little bit of white gap that I've got here. I'm just going to come in here like so, come like this. And wow, I'm almost a little dry there. You can see I've got a hard edge. So let's just add a little water. We don't want hard edges yet. Wouldn't be anything wrong with that, but let's just use the water brush now and just drag that paint around a little more. Is that dark enough? I think we need a little purple. What do you think? I think it needs a little bit of purple too. So I'm gonna come in here. Again, either purple would work. This one's more watered down, and I think I'm okay with a little bit more watered down because this is kind of a second layer of the purple. Just put a little bit of that. Should we come all the way? Probably I could come all the way to the top because I'm really not needing as much pink as I can see. I'm gonna just put a little bit of water now. Just soften that a bit, or kind of get more like a medium purple, if you will. Okay, I think that's looking a lot closer to what I want. I really like how much darker it is. I could push the darks even more, but like I say, we will be coming in with some details and that will even get the darks darker. So we might be okay. Yeah, let's just see, a little more blue. Just a touch. Okay, and then this one is a lighter petal, but I'll just put a little tiny bit more of the bluey color. And you know what? If you see that muck there that I've got and you don't like that, because I don't, I'm just gonna take this brush, it's a shader brush, wetting it and just kind of drying it off a bit. I can just do a little scrub here because this petal's dry now. And this is where I can kind of clean that edge up that I messed up. I can't do that when this petal's wet, but once it's dry, it's all good. Much happier with that. Okay, put a little bit, what do I have? Yeah, I got the blue on my brush right now. I'm gonna do these strokes. This is damp, my paper's damp, so these little strokes are showing or sort of staying put a little bit better. I'm just gonna put a little more of them back and forth. Ooh, okay, I'm almost too dark. We're almost getting wet on dry here, aren't we? And we're still supposed to be wet on wet. So I'll just use this brush and soften this. Paper's just drying, that's why it's starting to get that wet on dry look. Okay, I'm gonna put a little bit of the purpley color. I think I still had some of the blue on my brush too, but just a little bit of that right here. Okay, you can see it's bleeding around. I have enough water from kind of softening there. And I'll just pull it down in a few spots. We want harmony. We don't want this to look like it's disjointed or that it's too blue. And then I'll just come back this direction with my damp brush, just make sure I'm happy. And then I will just clean this up a little bit. I can see I'm getting a little bit hard edged right there. So just soften that with my brush. That was my water brush. Okay, and so here we have our flowers that we have done so far wet on wet, and where it's starting to dry or where we wanted more details, we allowed it to kind of get a little bit more like a wet on damp as we applied the paint. But this is overall a wet on wet technique, which is generally the technique I use at the beginning of any painting. There are a few times you could consider doing a shape, like a single petal, with a little bit more of a wet on dry approach. I'll just show you right here how you could do that. If you start a petal, so let's just say that's our little petal here. You could come in with one layer of paint, but I'm going to show you what the challenge is. You can come in and just drop in one color and then either soften with water, which is one option, or come in with another color. And if you work fast enough, you can blend the two colors together. So that is one option if you prefer working that way. The thing I find that can be a little bit of a disadvantage is you have to work fast enough in order to get that smooth transition. So I only would use a technique like that on a small shape. And most often what I would probably do is if I was doing a small shape, I might paint the entire thing wet on dry, but then I'll probably end up using the smallest amount of a wet on wet technique to deepen the areas I want to go darker. So I would, for instance, if I wanted more darks down at the base here, or closest to the center of the flower, I would drop a little bit more of those darks in while it's still wet and soften things a little bit. That's typically how I would work. I generally don't work just wet on dry when I'm in the initial layers of a painting. But occasionally I will use a hybrid approach like that, and that can be effective. But I'm gonna go ahead and dry everything before I come back on with my wet on dry layers. All right, so now that our painting's dry, we're gonna do wet on dry details. I'm also gonna show you how you can soften wet on dry details, but we'll leave some just nice and crisp as well. Now, when I'm not planning to soften details, this is where I want a more watered down paint. Might even want something more watered down than this. I'm going to be using a smaller brush. This is the Artegria Round, and it's going to allow me to get finer details. But let's just see what I think about this medium purple color. This is what I'm thinking to use for my details right here. And it's quite dark if I don't intend to soften things. So what I might do is I might make a color that's a little more diluted. So I'll just add a little more water to this well. And that's where having a nice concentrated amount of paint as well as some diluted paint can be helpful. But like I said, you can just add more water to your brush as well. You don't have to necessarily have a separate well of paint, but I think I'm going to be happier with what's over on this end here. It's actually still fairly dark, but if I squeeze my brush out a little bit, I'll be lighter. So let's give this a try. I'm going to tap my brush off. I'm going to tap it off at the ferrule so we squeeze some of the water out and leave pigment at the tip. So I've squeezed it more or less, or tapped it more or less in this area. Then over here, I'm going to start putting these details in. Let's see how this works. I think I'll be okay with it. They're fairly light and they will dry a little bit lighter than what you can see them right now. So I'm just going to come in and stroke downwards. And like I say, it's going to dry a bit lighter than it is. And so I think I'm going to be okay with this. But there's some details where I'm working wet on dry and I'm not softening anything. So I kind of have a little bit more of a crisp detail, and this is where I wouldn't want to be too dark when I'm leaving the details as crisp as this. I'm just kind of swinging a little bit with my wrist. Now let's come in here, and we still want this color. We might even want, actually, you know what? While I'm still this on my brush, I'm going to come a little darker down here. So I'm just putting a little more detail. I could probably even use the darker purple now. Even maybe a little bit of the dark blue. And I'll just do the same sort of thing, but I'm just going to come in just at the base, just like that. And then if I want to soften things, this is where I can wash and dry my brush. I could use another brush too, but I don't want to go too crazy here. I'm just going to just gently drag a little bit of that color up without going too overboard. I like that. Okay, that's all I'm going to do on this one. And then I'm going to come in here and still I'll use this purple, but I might, actually, you know what I might do? Just start with a few details with this darker blue and then I'll come over to the purple. So we can also create a little bit of a separation now between these two petals that were somewhat joined. So use that darker color first. And the reason I'm going to get away with it is because I'm going to come in now with the lighter purple and kind of drag it this way. So let's come like this. And there's really not that many details on this one. So we're going to end up a little more detailed than the reference photo even. Come a little more this way. We could have more blue. You could do a lighter blue here in the center if you want to. Again, I like the fact I'm fairly light with these details. I'm going to do that a little bit over here. There's not too many details. I might even add a little more water to my brush because I feel like the details could even be lighter. I'm swinging this direction because that's how it feels like it's going in the reference photo. I'm going to go on top of this a little bit. I like that. And then I'm going to come in, I think with the dark purple this time, just add a few details. I might even come, yeah, no, I think that's okay. I'm going to tap my brush off a little bit, so I'm a little bit finer. A very small brush is helpful for this. And I'm really coming to enjoy these soft Artegria brushes for details. I'm really enjoying them more than the firmer brush. Anyone who's watching my channel, you know I use the firm brushes quite a lot, but I'm really enjoying this number 3 Artegria round brush for details. Any soft brush that's got a nice tip though is nice. All right, finally, let's do a little bit, maybe a combination of the blue and the purple, because again, this particular petal feels more blue to me. If you look at it, just seems a little more blue. Ooh, that's too dark. You could see how I was kind of hovering first before I actually touched down. Okay, that's all the blue I want. I'm going to use a little bit of water on top of those if I can to kind of just soften them a bit. I'll show you more softening over here though. Okay, let's see. Maybe a little bit of the purple. It's going to probably bleed a little bit because I just got a little more water on here, but dip into a bit more water. I want these very faint and soft. We will come in with those final dark colors in here after. Okay, finally, this one doesn't have a lot of detail, but I do see a little bit of texture. And so I think the light purple might still be the right color. It's not going to show up as much on this one because it's already a darker petal, but I do like that texture there. Yeah, I'm liking that. I'm going to take some of it, swinging it from this direction. Hopefully maintain the curvature I see here. Yeah, I might even soften a little bit here because I'm not quite liking what I did. So just a little bit of water. Okay. Overall, I'm really happy with this. So now what I'm going to do is do the same thing, only I'm going to do a little more softening this time. So we'll start out with this purple, and I may even come in, maybe get by with a little darker purple, and I'm going to use my brush. This is my Simply Simmons 6, and I will use it to soften details a bit. So I'll show you the softening effect. So let's come in here, like so, and then using my water brush, I'm just dragging the details around a bit so that they're a little bit softer. Let's add a little more here. So it's almost going to end up with a little bit of a wet on wet approach because as I do this, I am applying water, right? So the water is going to start giving us a little bit of a damp detail effect. Just a little bit more here. And there you can kind of see a little bit of a different way of putting details on there. You can decide which one you prefer, or if you like certain details certain ways better. In this case, because I started dry, but then I added some water and then came back with paint, I'm almost getting like broken lines. So they're not fully there, right? They kind of fade out, come back, fade out, come back. So they kind of start crisp, get soft, crisp, soft. There's a little variety. And I did that because I feel like the lines kind of have a softness, and I wanted to just show you a different way of approaching this. I'm going to do the same thing here so we keep things kind of harmonized. So once again, and I did go with the lighter purple this time. If I want more dark, I can come in a minute. And then I'm trying to look at the reference photo to figure out where I see these lines, kind of how they're moving, and then back into the water. Use this soft brush and kind of soften things, or I should say the damp brush. And then I'm going to come back with a little more detail. So like I say, we're going to end up kind of with that same lost and found detail where the lines appear and then they disappear. I'm going to put a little more darkness here. Again, this is going to give us a soft look because we're damp. You can just wait as well and add that when it's more dry. This side is more dry, so you'll see the details show up better. But the other thing I can do, if I want more detail, if I feel like, okay, that got too washed out, I can just come when this is more dry and add more detail. I think things are dry enough that I could get by with doing some detail up here. If I want to go back to a little bit more of the wet on dry without softening, I'll just soften a little bit. So I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to come in here, maybe a combination of the blues. I feel like I want something just maybe a smidge darker than the light blue, but not as dark as the dark blue. So just mix them together. I'm going to do this line. Actually, this one I want to leave nice and crisp right there, I think, because that's kind of separating the two. And then I'll come in here and do a couple lines. Then I'm going to soften just a little with this brush. So I'm not softening as crazy as I was before, but I do want to soften a little. And then I'm going to come back in with just a little more detail in a minute. I'm just going to let that dry a bit. So I'll come down here and I'm just going to do very faint details here because I don't see a lot of really strong detail. We're going to be getting strong detail up here. But for now, I've got a combination of the two, the blue and the purple on my brush. And maybe I'll add a little more water just so that I stay nice. I'm just going to, when I'm adding water, I'm sometimes just dipping the very tip of my brush in there. So it's just a bit wet. And then I'm coming in here and just coming in with my detail like so. It's almost more detail than I want, and it's almost more stark than I want. So this is where, once again, coming in with the water, more water I add, the more I'm going to be able to soften it. Of course, if you leave it too long, you won't soften it. It's a timing thing. That's why a second brush is really helpful. It's ready to go. You don't have to wash anything. Okay, so this is slightly drier up here now. I might use a diluted bit of paint and add a few details, just a few. So now I'm diluted as I'm coming along here. And that's actually kind of diluting the details I already had. I kind of like that the way it is. I almost don't even know if I want to soften, but for the sake of keeping this flower more softened, we'll just soften a little bit. Okay, so there you can see the two different ways that we can get wet on dry details. In this case, we mainly left them crisp and dry. And in this case, we added a little more darkness in some places, but we softened pretty much all of our details to some extent. Because this is drying a bit more, I think I can put a tiny bit more crisp detail here. So I'm going to just do that and do a little bit here. And then I'm going to dry it thoroughly before I come in with these final details. All right, so over here, I've mixed up kind of a slightly dull purple. I just took some of each of these purples with a tiny bit of green and dulled it down a bit so it's not quite as vibrant. I'm going to use that for the details, but you could definitely just use one of your purples. There's no reason you can't do vibrant purple details either. That would be totally fine. So I'm just going to take some of this, again, using my small brush, and I'm going to try and do these details. I'm looking at my reference photo. I'm not being perfectly photorealistic, but I'm going to try to get some of these details in here, more or less what I'm seeing in the photo. So do some of these big lines or wider lines first, and then I'll come in and do some of the fine details. And once again, I'm using the Artegria round. This is the number 3. I think I'm happy with how this is coming. Probably could have got away with just the vibrant purple though. I'm letting these branch off a little bit as they come down. I might even take my water brush and just soften a little bit here so we end up with kind of just dulling this section down in this area. You can't really see, it almost gets a little darker. So I'm just going to put a little bit of water in there and soften that a little bit. Then I can come in and just add a little bit more color on top. It just felt a bit too stark in that little section. So I'll come back in and just refine that after it dries. I'm going to do the same thing over here. Now I have two options. I could go really stark. If you look at the reference photo really close, it is a slight bit of a fuzzy, soft line. It's just a little out of focus. So you could create an out of focus line if you want by being very damp. This is optional. You can come on just with your dry paint, just like I did here. I'm going to put a little bit of water and let it just sit for just a minute. I don't want it to be wet. So I'm just going to give it a quick little minute to sit, and I'm going to just test it. Let's see what it's actually behaving like. It's bleeding a little bit. It's mostly working, but I want it to be pretty damp to get these details the way I want them. Let's try taking a stroke. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, it's just kind of that in between. So let's just go ahead and do this. Again, if you wanted to draw some of these on here, you could do that too. They're kind of just branching off though, aren't they? Kind of like that. You can see the fuzzy look is because I wet it. If you don't like any of that fuzzy look, that's where you just want to go right on there. Dry. Perfectly dry paper will give you a really nice crisp line. And the only reason I'm showing you this is just because the reference photo, I was like, you know what, the fuzzy does give a different effect. And if you want to know how to do that, that's where you want to be pretty much dry, but a little dampness, and you're going to be able to achieve that look. I'm going to soften a little bit along here. It's not as wet anymore down there, I don't think. You can see it's drying so fast that I am starting to kind of get a little bit more of that wet on dry. I just washed off the dull purple, and I'm going to come in now with just the vibrant purple. And I'm going to just put a few more details kind of in here. And I'm ignoring, as I said, that fuzzy look. I'm not really worrying about that. But if you want those little fuzzy details, you could do that. I could actually show you. You could even just tap a little bit with like hardly anything on your brush. You could get a little bit of that fuzzy look right there. Very fine tip to do that. But I'm not really after the fuzzy as much. I don't think I need to get that on there. I'm focusing on these bigger details here. And yes, you can see I've got more of the purple, so I'm going to come back over some of them. I'm no longer getting that fuzzy look because the paper's clearly already past that stage of damp. It's starting to just get dry, and that's okay. It's got, as you can see, a little bit of that branching out in some spots, or that slight blur, without being like all blurry. But I'm going to just fix that. You can see what I just did there. Definitely want that more blurred out or just cleaned up. Yeah, I think I'm happy with that actually. And as you can see, I wasn't getting every line perfect. It's kind of looking at the photo, but I wasn't worrying about perfection here. I might even just soften this one in the middle a little bit with a little bit of water, because I'm seeing it's a little bit lighter in there. And then come over here. This is dry enough. I think that I can come in. I've still got the purple, the more vibrant purple in my brush, but I think I can come in here and just get a little bit more stark detail. If you want, you could even do a little bit of the fuzzy kind of look right here. Just a tiny, tiny bit, just like tapping. It's almost microscopic feeling to me. All right, so this brings us to the end of our violet flowers. I'm going to be sharing with you a few different techniques for painting these leaves, and I'll be releasing that video very soon. So subscribe and turn on your notifications so that you'll know when that video's out. In the meantime, I hope this tutorial has brought a little taste of God's beauty and peace into your everyday life, and that it's inspired you to continue enjoying your own creative journey. See you again soon. Bye.